So something else I'd like to point out about the relationship between Russia and the Wagner Group and what's happening in Niger and elsewhere in Africa has to do with the idea that, as far as I know, was first put forth in 2011 by the then director of the FBI, Bob Mueller, in a speech in New York, where he referred to the iron triangles. This new kind of international criminal activity that seemed to be emerging after September 11th, that connected these three kinds of actors, right? So traditional organized crime plus big business, corrupt elements within international corporations, and governments or individuals within governments or former government officials and so forth, all cooperating across ideological lines and sometimes with terrorist organizations, militant groups of different kinds, of all different kinds of beliefs, right? Because in this new kind of criminal system that has its tentacles all over the world, that depends in large part on extractive industries, right? The things that we can mine out of the ground, plus all kinds of other illegal activities. In this new kind of criminal world, ideology is not the important thing. The important thing is money. The important thing is the income to maintain those who are involved in their positions of power. Anne Applebaum, who writes for The Atlantic, among other things, another great historian, published a book recently called Autocracy, Inc., in which she explained a portion of this, which is, the linkages between autocratic regimes in different parts of the world, again with widely differing ideologies or with no ideologies in particular, and the way autocratic regimes help keep each other in power. So I want to point out in this context that the government of Russia is entirely dependent on extractive industries. The whole Russian economy boils down to the oil industry. Russia doesn't do much else except pump oil out of the ground and sell it. In fact, they're not even very good at that. They don't have the infrastructure to do it themselves. They've principally relied on Western companies to come and do the actual work. It is fair to call Russia a petrostate. Its whole economy is built on oil, and it sees that its economic model is in decline. It sees that its population is in decline, and it is seeking to expand its influence in other parts of the world. Of course, most particularly we can see this, most dramatically we can see this with Russian efforts over a number of years to destabilize and take over Ukraine. Right? This did not just start a year and a half ago. This started a decade ago or more. That's not the only place where Russia is pursuing these kinds of policies. It's also pursued these policies in Syria and in various parts of Africa. And it's important to see all of these as a piece. So the recent military takeover in Niger needs to be understood as a part of this bigger context. I think it's been really hard for Americans to understand Russia's war in Ukraine as a war of colonization, an imperial war. But I think it's vital for Americans to understand this context. And for this insight, I'm particularly grateful to another U.S. historian, Timothy Snyder at Yale, who has been very vocal and extraordinarily articulate in bringing to bear his study of Central and Eastern European history to understanding the European context, and particularly the relationship between Russia and Ukraine, and bringing forward very clearly this idea of a world of empire, wars of empire, versus the other possibilities that exist for humanity. So if we look at the playbook that Russia has been using in Ukraine for more than a decade now, dehumanizing the Ukrainian population, delegitimizing the Ukrainian government, claiming that Ukraine is not a real country, or claiming that they are a part of us or would be better governed by us, campaigns of cultural genocide against libraries and museums, against history, against the journalists and artists and so forth, a campaign of removing the political leadership of the country, a literal genocide by stealing children and taking them to Russia, the environmental crimes that Russia has committed, certainly the breaching of this major dam and flooding so much of the country, the constant menacing against the largest nuclear power plant in Europe at Zaporizhia, and the always threatening to use nuclear weapons, the weaponization of food, as Dr. Richardson was referring to, cutting off Ukraine's grain supply from countries around the world that depend on it, the torture and disappearance of political leaders and others, the war crimes on the battlefield. All of these, the details may be different, but the basic playbook is European colonial conquest, patterns that have existed for 500 years and change at this point. Different specific circumstances, but very familiar themes and techniques and tactics. In fact, as Snyder points out, these techniques and tactics bear particular resemblance to the previous big colonial war inside the European continent, which we tend to think of as World War II, but from the German point of view is a war to establish German colonization in Poland, Belarus, and particularly the black soil of Ukraine, right? Snyder's insights and helping to recast the way Americans, at least, think about World War II and the Holocaust have been absolutely invaluable to me as a historian, as a teacher, as an American citizen and human being trying to understand the world that we live in. I would strongly recommend that you find Tim Snyder's talks about his book Bloodlands, before that Black Earth. A good place to start to figure out where he's coming from is his speech in Vienna at the Judenplatz in 2019. Very, very impressive, bringing our understanding of World War II into the present moment. It was before Russia's current war in Ukraine, but you can see very, very clearly the connections.